right, well, welcome to another edition of the Digging Deeper podcast, and today's a fun one. We have our first ever married couple. The Glaudes are here on the podcast.
We've had a couple weeks worth of firsts. Mike was the first time. Anthony was the first one.
Then we did the service live last week.
Yeah, it's been like 4 weeks in a row of firsts. We just had to switch it up.
Yeah, so we've got Jean here, but Sam, so he's been on the show. This is your first time.
Old news.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, all right. So rumor is that when you found out I wanted to have Jean on, you quickly interjected and said, not unless I'm on this one.
Yeah, I said he wasn't allowed to be on it.
And why is that?
Because what we're going to talk about today. And he gets a lot of things wrong.
Specifically that I get everything wrong.
That's okay.
And she needs to be here to do damage control.
Okay.
Yes.
So today is actually going to be a live counseling session between you guys and me. It's going to be wonderful.
And not only is she my wife, but she's also my PR firm.
Yep.
Make sure that I don't say anything wrong. My calendar. Yeah, it's a good.
But husband and wife, married.
Yes.
One daughter. Also, both of you are on staff here at Rice City Church.
Yep.
So we got a lot of...
and we also coach at the same gym, work out in the same classes.
Okay.
We work at the church together. We got a lot of endeavors.
Not a lot of separate things you guys
always
endeavor
together
to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Some like it more than others.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you on. And yesterday, I kicked off a brand new series called Prodigal. And looking at Luke chapter 15, the famous story that Jesus tells of the two brothers. One decides to ask for his inheritance early, goes and squanders that, and then runs back to daddy, and daddy loves him a lot, and older brother doesn't like it so much. No. Yesterday, though, and I think it's important for those, especially in the first service, I'm going about preaching this series by trying to get in the life of each brother. So I'm doing a first-person narrative. So I started off the message just acting like I was a younger brother. And I thought, because we'd showed the entire passage beforehand and read it, everyone would know that the story I was telling wasn't me. Although...
No. That's not what happened at all.
There were people that were like, oh man, you lived a crazy life. I can't believe you went and hired prostitutes and stuff. I was like, I did not.
Yeah.
So,
but even so far, but then also in my group chat with some guys from my life group, they're kind of like, what's going on right now? They're just they just did, and that was 20 minutes in.
I know,
and they just still didn't catch on.
There were so many different clues.
Well, you're the oldest brother, right?
I am, and my family. Yeah.
So at second service, I was like, oh, that's so funny. I thought Brandon was the oldest in his family, and I was like, oh wait, and then I caught on. I knew, I knew what you were doing.
We confused everyone, but I do think for the most part, it was just trying to, see it from a really kind of emotional and human level, and to see it, the main part yesterday was looking at this notion that there's nothing you can do to cause God to love you less.
Right.
That, there is mercy and forgiveness that is abounding, and he's waiting for us to come back, and not just waiting, but he's running in our direction. And so when we were thinking about today for Digging Deeper, I thought it'd be fun to share your story a little bit, because there's elements that coincide with that part of the story. And I think something that would be really encouraging for people just to hear the way you've really received the embrace of the grace of God.
Yeah.
And so maybe, Jean, why don't you start just a little bit, and I think you've shared a little bit on the podcast before, but a little bit of your upbringing and just your relationship with God, church, all that kind of stuff. And then Sam will kick it to you next. How about that?
And Sam and I couldn't have polar opposite upbringings too.
Yeah.
So I grew up not in a Christian family, very not anti-Christian. There was no thoughts towards God, just impartial or whatever, just didn't care. Not only that, but also my mom and my dad were both addicted to drugs, both addicted to alcohol. We were constantly moving, constantly changing places. We started off in San Diego, North Park area, eventually made our way to East County, just always changing houses, changing locations. When I was 6 years old, my oldest brother called CPS on my mom, and we were taken away. We were put into the foster care system, and we were there for better part of 2 years, but we were living with our uncle, which is really awesome. During that time, my mom and dad separated. They were homeless. My mom ended up going to a drug and rehab program, giving her life to Jesus there. Wow. She was able to win custody of us back, which is a huge victory in the eyes of the state and childcare, and that's always the goal. And so from there, I always kind of had this idea that like, okay, God did that. Like, and there was no question about it. Like, God is powerful.
Like, you had that thought even before somebody even put that thought in your mind. Like, there had to be something else that orchestrated this.
Well, because her drug program was Christian.
Okay.
Like, we were only able to see her on Sundays at church.
Okay.
So like those two moments were just so close together. Learning about Sunday school and also being able to visit our mom.
Gotcha.
So in my mind, those were the same thing. It was the power of God that did that. And so I always just had a very strong conviction that God is real, that he is powerful and that he can change lives. I mean, in junior high, I had my standard rebellion, whatever, like as a junior higher, it wasn't anything crazy. In high school is when I gave my life to Jesus. Like, oh, I understand this. This is what I want to do. And I've been trying, since then to live a life that is pleasing to God with its ebbs and flows. But yeah.
And you're currently 27, 8?
I really appreciate 30, that. I'm also
47.
Am I 30? I'm 32.
32.
I'm
okay,
32. Yeah.
Okay, so you've been following Jesus for about 13, 14 years now or more?
I've been following Jesus for about 20 years.
20 years. Okay, so early high school.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So it was my freshman, sophomore year. So I was 14, 15. So, so I guess like 18 years. Yeah.
Gotcha. Sam, how about you? So you did not grow up in that type of environment?
No.
Okay.
Kind of opposite.
Okay.
I had a very I would just say standard upbringing. Like my mom and dad are still married. I've never moved. I've lived in the same house till I got married. I moved out a little bit, would just come back home. So I never moved around or hopped around.
You always had a home to come back to.
I always had a home to come back to. Okay. I would say it was a Christian family. Like my grandma came from Japan and she was a Christian. Like she learned all about it. She brought my mom and my aunt and my uncle through church. Like they were baptized at a young age. So it was a Christian household and we would go to church, but it wasn't every Sunday. And we weren't super involved. And I never wanted to go to Sunday school. I was just I'd sit in big church with you, So we would go to church, but it wasn't consistent. Yeah. And it was mostly Easter and Christmas. Okay. As I got older.
So Creaster.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
But maybe a few more. Maybe Mother's Day too.
Okay.
But yeah, we just had a nice family upbringing. My family's super close. My aunts and uncles and cousins and yeah.
So was there a part for you ever that you felt like you made the decision to make the faith of your own, and became a Christian? Or
I feel like every single time I would go to church, they would be do you give your life to Christ? And I would close my eyes and I would pray and I'd be like, what now? I would do that every Sunday and I'm I don't know what you're supposed to do now, but I would get so scared to ask questions. Okay. So I would always consider myself a Christian I wouldn't say I was a Jesus follower at that time. I was just I believe in God. I go to church. Yeah. I got a nice life going, I'm a good kid.
Did you feel like, maybe both of you answer this question, do you feel like that high school and maybe beyond, the decisions you made, you were trying to make in consideration of the way Jesus called you to live, or do you more kind of go about making decisions on what felt good, what everybody else was doing? How did you make decisions?
So in high school, I was always in honors. Okay. I was a cheer, ASB, all my friends were the football players, cheerleaders and stuff. Okay. But in high school, that's when everyone started to go to parties and stuff. And so I would go. And I feel I would always feel a little guilty, if I drank on the weekend, but I wouldn't tell my mom, I would hide it, so I'm still a good kid and I'd still get good grades. And so it wasn't crazy, I lost my way, but it was oh yeah, I like to party with my friends and we're all good kids. So whatever, but I'd still feel that tinge of guilt in the back of my mind. Something's not right here. Okay. I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And what's so funny is her, I would go drink on the weekends and stuff. In my mind, it's she's ham. She's going hard.
So ham, what maybe for our listeners, including myself, what is that?
John, what is that?
What is ham? What is that?
Just living for the party. Life of the party.
So you were kind of not really.
It wasn't casual drinking.
I mean, we would party. The movies, high school parties, Yeah. That was that.
That was you.
And then Jean's never been to a high school party. Every time I watch movies like that, he's what is going on? These young kids
do that? Okay.
Yeah. I'm yeah.
And if I remember right, that you were given the name Ham.
Yes, people
Sam.
like to call me Ham Sam.
Ham Sam.
So,
what does ham mean? What is
Like
it?
going
ham
hard.
it up or
Like
go,
go,
go hard?
hamming-
Okay. Okay.
like going all in.
All right.
Hard as a
What?
What?
This is
Oh, does it?
yes,
Hard as a mother?
yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
like
Yeah.
oh, so you appreciate that now as a
Yeah,
mom.
yeah.
You understand
Thanks,
what they mean by
yeah.
raising
this
kids.
is a
Okay, great.
PG-13 podcast, apparently.
Bring Sam on, and all of a sudden we're gonna get like explicit content rating issues.
I had no
Okay.
Beep. No.
All right.
I would say that throughout high school, I really, really, really tried to make every decision I made through the lens of the Bible. But that's a very religious answer. The truth is, I wanted to be accepted by the church I was a part of. And I felt like there was a big emphasis on last names and the family you came from. And I didn't have that. I didn't have a last name that garnered respect, if you will. And so I felt like everything I did was to put the Glaude name, like I'm going to make a name for myself here. And so it wasn't necessarily what does the Bible say, is like what will be seen as good in the eyes of the people who are running the ministries I'm a part of.
Okay.
Let me do that so that I can make a name for myself.
Okay.
Essentially, that was 100% the heart of it, was to make a name for myself.
So would it be fair, just kind of in looking at the story that Jesus told, older brother, younger brother, maybe you had some more younger brother tendencies as Ham Sam.
Yes.
And you had some older brother tendencies
Yeah.
to like really do what was right, but maybe not with the right motives.
100%.
Okay.
And to make anyone who wasn't doing that feel like they weren't welcome around me, which is
okay.
one of my biggest like regrets looking at my early fervor is that I was not loving. I was not a loving person. And if you weren't doing what I felt was the way you should be doing things, I was just kind of like distance myself. I don't want to be part of that because I don't want to be associated with that.
So then how did the two of you meet? And it seems like she'd been the type of person based upon her what she said that you'd been like, stay away. But tell me a little bit about like, how'd you guys meet and what was
Go
that?
ahead.
Yeah.
So we talked about like high school, and
Yeah.
so then in college I went to San Diego State, and I
Okay.
was in a sorority.
Aztecs, there you
Yes,
go.
go
All right.
Aztecs. And I know Robert always talks about his college days and how he was in a Christian fraternity. I was in a sorority, and it was not a Christian sorority.
Okay.
But like I was in college, I would get my schoolwork done.
Yeah.
But once again, I like to party. And
Okay.
it's like, I don't want people to think like I was doing all these drugs and stuff. I never done drugs.
No, that was Anthony. We talked
Yeah,
about
that was
that.
Anthony. Anthony, yeah. That's another story. I'm like, what? How dare you? Oh my goodness. No, I just like to party. And I still like to party. Doesn't mean I have to drink, okay?
Yes.
I like to go to parties
Yes.
still.
Cool.
I'm an extrovert. But yeah, so I just like to party. And then that was college. And
Yeah.
then I got a boyfriend, and I would say it was a very, very, very toxic relationship.
Wasn't me.
It was Jean. No, I'm just kidding. And we finally broke up. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do whatever I want to do. It was like a controlling relationship. And so I was like, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Like, I'm going to do me, Like, that was like my mindset. And so I got into like fitness and stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do like a fitness show. And so I started training for that. And that was like very like strict, like with your diet, every
Yeah.
single thing you put in your body and your fitness, all that stuff. So then I started training for that, and that was like 6 months long. And I started following someone else in San Diego who was doing that same competition. And he was on Ellen. He like had a YouTube channel, all this stuff.
Oh, this is your brother.
Yes, it's Jean's brother.
Just follow my brother on Instagram.
Yeah, great. That's
But I was
good.
like, oh my gosh, he lives like right down the street from me. That's so funny. Like, I'll see him at the show. And we end up having mutual friends. So at the fitness show, I was like, oh, hi, like, nice to meet you. And we had mutual friends. So I was talking, and he had his brother there. And so I was like, oh, hi,
Yeah.
And that was it. So I thought,
Yeah. So I went to go support my brother for his show. It was a physique show. And so I go, I'm in that circle of friends, and Sam comes up and she goes, hi, everyone. And she leaves. And I just was like, that was the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. Like, what in the world?
Yeah.
And my brother, Sam, is a sucker for following people on Instagram. And so my brother one time was like, hey, go support my brother and follow him on Instagram or something like that.
Yeah.
And then Sam was like, okay.
Yeah, so I added
so
him.
no, like, and I posted a picture with my brother, like, hey, proud of him.
Did you have your shirt on or off?
I had my shirt on. He had his shirt on. Yes, yes.
Important questions
Yes.
right now.
And I see this like from someone I don't know. And so I go, and it's this lady. And I am like, oh, this is the girl who was in that mutual circle. She liked my picture. Obviously, she likes me.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
that's what that means.
If you got the like, it transcends the like button.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
And so I think about it for about 3 days, this like that I got. And then I finally send her a DM, and I go, hey, I saw that you do CrossFit. I'd be interested in trying CrossFit too. I'd never done CrossFit yet.
Okay.
And she said, yeah, come to my CrossFit gym. And so then I started doing CrossFit, and I still do.
Yep.
Okay.
And we both do. Yeah.
But just a funny side story. We came in and I didn't know how to say his name.
Yeah, because you call him Jean, or what you call
I
him?
was just like, oh, hey, you.
She did the thing where she's like, hey, this is Mike. And then I'm like, oh, hey, Mike, my name's Jean.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's how you say
Yeah,
it.
that's how you say it.
So CrossFit was the connection.
Yes.
Right.
And then eventually you started dating.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Where did just conversations as far as your walk with the Lord, church, Jesus, where did that start to enter in to the conversation between you guys?
I was always very like, this is who I am. This is what I do. I lead worship at a church. I do that every Sunday. I don't want to be hanging out on.
And just
late.
remind me, were you working at Rise when
Yeah.
you guys met? That's what I thought. You were a worship pastor at the time.
Yep. And so I was like, I was very upfront. This is what I do. I don't go out on Saturdays. I don't party. I don't do that. And so if she'd invite me to hang out with people on Saturday night, I'd be like, no, I'm not going. I'm not interested. But I really liked her.
Yeah.
I was really frustrated with the amount of parties she went to, but I really liked her. Like, it was like this weird, like, and so, and I feel like I probably shouldn't share this, but who cares? Like, she'd come to church.
Good.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
Here we go.
she'd like come to church sometimes. And she'd be like, hi. And I'm like, oh gosh, you smell like hangover.
Do you not brush
like,
your teeth?
So bad. It was just like so bad. But she invited herself.
Yeah.
So she knew that I was a worship leader. And then she's like, you're a worship leader, right? I'm like, yeah. She's like, I'd love to come to church. I'm coming to your church. Oh, okay. Like,
And then I never
awesome.
left.
And then for me, that was, which we'll get into some of the meatier, spicier details of our relationship. But that interest in like, oh, she's interested in God, she wants to know more, was always like kind of what I always went back to, of just like this, like I know that she wants to know God.
Yeah.
And I want to be a force of like, I want to direct her in that direction. That sounds way more maniacal than it actually is. But like,
Good word.
Yeah, like maniacal. Like, I just want to be like, if I'm the person who's going to help bring her closer to Jesus, like I want to be that tool in that vessel. And so
you began dating, you started coming to church, and at some point you did make a decision, because I remember baptizing you, which was amazing.
Yeah, so I started coming to church, and then, so like I said, I invited Jean to CrossFit, and I always say I invite people to CrossFit, and I invite people to church now.
Yeah.
So like I started going to church, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would always go to church like with my family, like I was saying, but it was like, oh, I'm making this decision for me. Like I'm going to wake up, even though I was out late the night before, I'm going to wake up and get to second service, because I wasn't going to first. And I'm going to get to second service. And I was like, wow. And I remember I would tell you, Brandon, and I would tell like Matt and anyone who was preaching, like, you're speaking to me. Like, do you know like what I'm going through? And it was just like, I didn't want to miss church, and I wanted to like dive in and learn anything I could. And I feel like growing up, I had so many questions, because who doesn't?
Yeah.
But I was always so nervous to like ask these questions. So I remember Jean and I would just like talk for hours, and I would just be like, well, what does this mean? Like, what about this? What about this? And I remember one of the conversations was, I was talking to him and I said like, oh, well, I'm a good person. And he was like, well, what does that mean? Like, how do you define that? And I'm like, you know, like I'm a good person. And he was like, well, I think I'm a good person too, because I try to base everything I do from what the Bible says. And like when he said that, I was like, oh, like, yeah, like that was like a switch flicked on for me when he said that. I'm like, wow. And I just really wanted to dive in and learn and answer all my questions.
yeah, I think I was in that conversation, I was trying to figure out what her measuring stick was. Like I measure my base, and I don't think I said I'm a good person. I think I just said like, I try to base goodness off of what the Bible says.
Yeah.
I was like, so what is good to you? What is like, if you're a good person, where's that measuring stick for you? And there was none. It was just a, you know,
maybe comparative to other people, or how you were.
Definition that, you know, nothing solid about it. And so,
And so at some point you found that, I'm not as good
Yeah.
I need Jesus.
Yes.
For forgiving me my sin. You got, became a Christian or really owned your faith,
Yeah.
baptizing you.
Yep. March 23rd. March 26th.
March 26th.
2017.
Okay.
And Jean and Brandon, you baptized me. But I remember being like, okay, like I always considered myself a Christian. I really want to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Like I want to make this decision for my life.
Yeah. And so that was the path. And I remember Jean having conversations with you and there's these conversations like, hey, like I know that you're pursuing Jesus and I know Sam's new to Jesus. How are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And there was a point that you were honest with me.
Yeah. I was going to say, so her baptism, which is supposed to be such a great thing, we were sleeping together. And it was
Do you want that to be the clip that we put on social media?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that moment is so. It just stands out to me because it's supposed to be this like I got to baptize my future wife, like at the beach with all of her friends and family around, and I just felt like the biggest hypocrite. And that tension, like I still feel it right now, like that tension. So. To essentially, as with young love, a lot of times if you don't put boundaries on your burning passion, falling into things that you just really don't want to and you wish you weren't. And so I didn't do a good job in the beginning of our relationship of setting up boundaries that were like smart and and so just I don't know. I'm not excusing anything, but passion takes over, and then you hit one base, and then you hit another base, and it's really hard to say no. We're never going to that base again. You know. And so
in the midst of that, though, were there conversations that were taking place between the two of you as far as your biblical convictions and is it okay or we shouldn't do this or why? Like
she would get so mad at me.
Yeah, like in the beginning, I was like, I didn't initiate anything. I'm the girl, okay. But like then he'd be like, no, we cannot do this. And I'm like, why? Like this is what people do when they're in a relationship. Like I didn't get it.
Yeah. And
then like time goes on and then it'd be like, no, we can't do this. And then like I told him like, I kind of feel like this nugging feeling in my heart, like we shouldn't be doing this. And he was like,
that was like months in, once the Holy Spirit's working on our heart and stuff like that. So, but it was a long time of me like being, shocker, like emotional roller coaster of of passion and of desire and of like, what, I don't care. Like, this is what I want. And then also like, I'm a terrible person. How can I be such a hypocrite? People would automatically reject me. There was that fear of like, I need to make a name for myself. Yeah. And I was like, even before this podcast, like I'm like in this office and I'm like, this could be the conversation where people no longer think of me as, like no longer look up to me, which is such a lame thing to aspire for, but it really does control a lot of my like emotion and why I do things is like, I want people to like have a positive image of who I am.
Yeah.
And so those two things of like, I really like this lady. She's actively following Jesus. She's making steps that are like leaps and bounds, inviting her entire family to church, inviting her friends to church. Like God is doing something in her life. And I'm also being this like really, I'm torn because
just not leading her well in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
and so there was for a long time, there was this conflict in my like soul, like more than just my mind or my heart, like ripping me apart. Like why am I doing this? But also why do I not care enough to change it or to, and it eventually got to a point where I ended up moving in with her.
Yeah.
It was so easy to justify.
Yeah.
It was my family. Like I said, my family, even to this day, a home is very hard. There's not even a place that outside of our new family, there's not even a place that the Glaude calls home. Like that doesn't exist right now. Like there's no place where you can always go home. And so it was one of those situations where I was in a living situation that changed and I had nowhere to go. And she was living with a roommate who wasn't ever there. And I was like, well, I don't like that you're by yourself. Like, I'll just stay every couple nights just to make sure you're safe. Like, whatever. It's just so easy to justify. It's San Diego. It's so much cheaper to live. Like you know all of them, all the excuses out there.
Yeah.
And so it just got to a point where like the dichotomy of life was like ripping me apart, that you ended up asking a question and I just like just spilled on you.
Yeah.
Like it was in a basement of like a random
We were in
place.
another church, for like a lunch, and then I remember just, hey, how
Sam?
are things going with you and Sam? And it was just like, oh, wow,
Oh,
okay,
let's go to a different room.
Yeah.
Like,
and so I remember, I mean, that moment and being like, oh my goodness, like I am so grateful that he's sharing this. There's a part of me that's really bummed and like, oh my goodness, like they're sleeping together, they've moved in together, you know, Sean's on our team and stuff like that. And what example is this set to other people? How do we handle this?
Yeah.
And also knowing Sam, you were like relatively new and really growing and passionate your faith. Like, how do we approach this situation without like making you feel like we're legalistic and all this other kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Because he didn't tell me he was going to tell you.
No.
But I do remember like a few weeks before you told Brandon, we had a worship night and like like going to worship night. And I remember I just like started crying and I was like, just felt so convicted.
Was it a Rise worship night or was it? Oh.
And I just remember crying and like, that's never happened before. So I was like, oh my gosh, something has to change.
Yeah. And so maybe, you know, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, just share what happened in that conversation and then we'll kind of keep going from there and get ready to wrap up.
So, you know, I think a few things happened. One, business, like, you know, let's handle business. I stepped down from the worship ministry for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to like, hey, let's figure this out, you know? So that was like the business aspect of it. And then there comes the relational aspect of pastoring. And I'm pretty sure that was when you invited Sam and I over to have a conversation with you and Jamie, just to feel like, what are the next steps? Like, what can we do? And so Sam and I were driving together to the dinner, or just I don't even know if it was dinner. It was just like a
I think we do like a later dessert because the kids go to bed and so they don't interrupt that. And we're like, that's probably not a conversation we want to jump in on right now.
And so then you just kind of listen to our story and how we got to where we were. And I was very used to the church discipline model of things of, okay, Brandon's going to ask me and Sam to break up. We're going to need to probably meet with a counselor about what we're going through or whatever, so they can figure out why we did it. And then maybe, you know, one day they'll approve us getting back together. Something like very like oppressive, some oppressive form of change. And we were going through in the car every possible thing.
We were like, what if this happens? What if this happens?
I just need you to know, they might ask us to break up, and you just like, we're going to have to do it.
I've never seen myself have so much power as you're like giving me right now. Like, I'm going to tell you to break up.
Yeah. But it was like very like, you know, like I was bracing her for any possible thing.
Yeah.
And again, new Christian, I'm like, this is just, it just makes sense because I've put my life to mean a certain standard and da.
And I was like, what is happening?
And we have this conversation, and then you and Jamie, like, we finish it, we lay our guts out, and you and Jamie look at each other and you're like, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And I'm like, here it comes. and you're like, why don't we just marry you right now? And like, now it's legal. I'm a pastor. Jamie's a witness. Like,
and she's a photographer too.
Yeah,
so like, I mean, we can knock this whole thing out right now. Bada bing, bada boom.
And that shattered. That was the one thing in my mind where I'm like, that's not gonna.
We were
happen.
like, we didn't think of that scenario.
Yeah, and it like shattered just so many like ideas of church discipline, of relationship, of da. Like it was just like, oh, you're extending grace. Like this isn't like, and it's not grace where you get to stay exactly what you're doing.
Yeah,
it's grace to change.
Yeah,
and that was huge. From there, we had a conversation, and one of the staff members offered up their house for me to live in and rent a room from.
Yeah, and just make sure everyone knows you guys did not get married in
we
the living room at that moment.
We did not. We did not get married at that moment. Okay. But then you said, okay, if you're not going to do that, then what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And so I ended up renting a room from a staff member who opened it up. And that was super awesome and super helpful for me in that moment that I needed. I was able to save up. We proposed, ended up getting a townhome to stay in, and then we got married. It was just like,
it was quick. Like you proposed a couple, like maybe 2 months after that.
And then we were married
in like 8
within
months.
8 months. Yeah. So it was a very quick process, but it came out of that. Like, I don't need to hide this anymore. Like, I just need to run to the Father, right? Yeah. I need to go, like, I need to just put it out there and leave myself that the prodigal son thought that he was going to receive discipline and become a servant, but instead he received sonship back. Yeah. And like for me, I was expecting discipline and I have to earn my place again. And it was almost just like, all right, grace, but let's change.
Yeah.
And those aren't like polar opposites. Grace to change is a very real thing. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I just remember being like so thankful how everything like lined up, but it was still really hard. Like we were still dating, we'd still hang out all the time, and every time he had to leave, I would cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you moved back into your mom's place.
Yeah, I moved back home.
Yeah.
And it was still hard, but it was like, okay, we're working towards something instead of just like living willy-nilly.
Yeah. So trying to like kind of bring this all together, the overarching sentiment yesterday, there's nothing you can do to cause God to love you less. And, you know, this isn't so much about how Jamie and I worked through this, but I would say like a part of the way we try to approach things is like, we have a loving Father that I really hope embraces me all the times that I screw up. And, you know, I got my own list of stuff that I'm dealing with. Because grace actually is the greatest catalyst for change.
Right.
That's when you really understand it. It's not to be something that's abused and used, but it's rather something that can change you. But there's also this aspect of it's almost like a flooding sensation that comes over you when you realize, like, in spite of this, or even though we were doing this, or that, like he still loves me and he welcomes me back. And so I guess, you know, I hope that's, yesterday I was saying, like, I hope that's really good news for people to receive that. And next week we'll talk more about, like, there are some people that would rather see you disciplined.
Yeah.
And there's some people who'd rather like make an example, and that's kind of the older brother, I think we'll look at. But maybe just as we close, like, I mean, what would you say to people out there who feel like they are seeking to follow Jesus, but they keep stumbling? And what should they do, or how should they approach this, and how should they see the Father? Maybe from your own example of what it's meant to you, and even what, when you chose to come back home in the presence of the Father and live the way He's called you to live, what do you feel like that meant to your relationship and your eventual marriage?
I'm going to answer that question by telling you about this conference I went to this weekend.
Okay.
Called MomCon.
Okay.
I ran the live stream for it. I didn't just attend. But I
You
don't
just
put that
went to the
past me.
MomCon by
I know.
yourself.
But there was a night where there's a CEO and there was like 20 staff and just regular ladies. And they were all on stage. And the CEO starts off and she goes, I struggle with crippling anxiety, and I feel like no one understands me, and that no one will be able to understand me because of my position. And they hand it to another person, and it's a girl who was molested as a child, and how she feels like she's never been worthy of love. And they hand it to a next person who has a eating disorder, and the next person who feels who has 2 kids who are grown up, and she raised them in the church, did the mom ministry, did all that stuff, and now they both walked away from Jesus, and she feels like she's a failure. And it was just story after story after story after story about people who were just dealing with this weight every single day. And I was crying. I'm like tearing up right now. Like, I love mom conferences.
He really does.
And women's events, because they're so vulnerable. It's
There's
not,
your other social media clip for the week. I love mom conferences.
It's not all like rah and let's charge the field. It's like real, honest vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it was just 20 people. They just went and they just said what they're dealing with. And it was just this moment of like, we've all got stuff.
Yeah.
We've all are dealing with stuff. And the biggest lie is that we're alone, or that people will judge us, or even if they do, who cares? But like, that person who's judging you is dealing with something, you know, which is causing them to judge you. Like, we're all dealing with stuff. And so for that person who's feeling like they have to hide, like, it was only after I brought it to the light that it was able to change, because I couldn't do it on my own.
Yeah.
And that if this is a family, and if we believe that grace causes change, then we're going to walk through that with you.
Yeah.
Now, there were consequences, but that's not, a consequence is not condemnation.
Yeah.
If someone's condemning you, that's a very different thing than someone wanting to help you get out of that situation or whatever.
Right.
And so I would just say, bring it to the light, because there's so much freedom that comes in it.
Yeah.
And we're all dealing with stuff, so don't feel like you're alone.
Sam, what do you think is meant just even for your marriage? You guys been married now for
Almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years.
Next month.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like this happened early on in like my faith journey.
Yeah.
So I feel like if it would have gone a different way, like, I don't know, maybe I would have walked away and been like, what is this? You know, but I just feel like all the grace we were shown, like, it was just it was amazing, you know? And so now even being a mother, like, I'm like, well, I want to show grace to Ryan and show her that, you know, she can bring things to us. She can bring things to, you know, her Heavenly Father. And I just hope if anyone's stuck with somewhere, like, you are not stuck forever. Yeah. You know? So like, whether you are living together, like we work, like rent is expensive, you know? But like,
there are people out there who want to help.
There are people that want to help, and once
you've got a chance to make a way open.
And like Jesus will put people in your lives that will help you, and I
mean, I love you both. Seriously, it's amazing just to see their stories come. Have you both on staff, but also just friends, and just really appreciate you a ton. So there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. So that was
Amen.
That's this week. Next week, we'll look at the older brother. And for those coming to service or watching online, I will be doing a first-person narrative again. So it's not my story, although I am the oldest brother of a family of 5. So I might pull some from experiences, but I'm trying to get into the life of that older brother.
I'm imagining the person who still doesn't know that you were doing a first-person narrative, and they're going to be so confused next Sunday when you have a completely different story.
Yeah, I'm going to be schizophrenic.
Like, what the heck?
This is actually about mental health. So anyway, thanks for joining us, digging deeper, and thank you to the Glaudes for just your honesty, transparency, vulnerability, and I think that paves the way for transformation for lots of people. So appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you next week.